The organist's first notes filled St. Catherine's Cathedral as I stood in the bridal suite, staring at my reflection. The ivory lace dress fit perfectly, custom Vera Wang, paid for by my trust fund. Through the heavy oak door, I could hear 300 guests settling into their seats, whispering about the fairy tale wedding of the season. My phone buzzed. A text from Agent Morrison. Assets frozen. Teams in position. Give the signal. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I smoothed down the beaded bodice, my hands steady despite everything. In exactly 17 minutes, Marcus Webb, my fiancé of 2 years, Harvard law graduate, rising star at Whitman Associates, would walk down that aisle expecting to marry me and my family's pharmaceutical fortune. What he didn't expect was that the woman he'd been planning this day with wasn't the naive heiress he thought he'd manipulated so expertly. She was a federal witness, and I'd been wearing a wire for 6 months. "Darling, you look absolutely radiant." My mother swept in, champagne drunk and beaming, her St. John's suit probably costing more than most people's cars. "Marcus is so nervous out there, it's adorable. Your father just gave him the most wonderful talk about family and legacy." Legacy. The word tasted bitter. My father, Senator Richard Ashford, had built his career on anti-corruption platforms. The irony wasn't lost on me. "Mom, I need a moment alone," I said quietly. "Of course, sweetheart. Prenuptial jitters are perfectly normal." She kissed my cheek, leaving a mark of Chanel Rouge allure that I didn't bother wiping away. 20 minutes. Then your whole life begins. She had no idea how right she was. The door clicked shut. I pulled out my phone and opened the encrypted messaging app the FBI had installed. 3 months ago, I'd stumbled upon something I wasn't meant to see. A laptop left open in Marcus's study, emails discussing something called Project Nightingale. At first, I thought he was planning a surprise. Then I saw the dollar amounts, the names, the schedules of pharmaceutical shipments from Ashford Biotech, my family's company. My company, technically. I'd inherited controlling shares when my grandmother died 2 years ago, right before I met Marcus at that charity gala in Manhattan. He'd seemed so genuine, so different from the usual social climbers. A lawyer working pro bono cases, passionate about justice, from a middle-class family in Ohio. He'd made me feel normal for the first time in my life. He'd made me feel loved. Every word had been a lie. I typed quickly, "Ready." 16 minutes. Agent Morrison's response was immediate. "Stay calm. Remember, you're doing the right thing. The right thing." I'd been telling myself that for months as I pretended everything was perfect, as I let Marcus believe he'd pulled off the con of the eye century. The right thing as I copied files from his laptop. The right thing as I met with federal prosecutors in underground parking garages like something out of a movie. The right thing as I planned a wedding to a man who saw me as nothing more than a key to a vault. A sharp knock interrupted my thoughts. "Come in." It was Vanessa, my maid of honor since college, carrying my bouquet, white peonies and garden roses, each stem costing $40 because Marcus insisted on perfection. Marcus insisted on a lot of things once the engagement ring was on my finger. "You okay?" Vanessa studied my face with those sharp eyes that had gotten her through Yale Law. "You seem, I don't know, different." "Just nervous," I lied, taking the flowers. Their scent was overwhelming, cloying. "Listen, I know I'm supposed to be supportive in everything, but..." She hesitated, lowering her voice. "Are you absolutely sure about this? Because we can leave. Right now. I've got my car. We could be in Connecticut before anyone realizes you're gone." My heart clenched. Vanessa had never liked Marcus, though she'd been too good a friend to say it outright until now. She'd noticed the small things, the way he steered conversations about money, how he'd suddenly needed my help with his student loans, his insistence on being added to certain accounts for convenience. "I'm sure," I said, and it was the truth, just not in the way she thought. "Okay." She squeezed my hand. "Then let's get you married." The bridal suite emptied as the processional music began. I could hear my bridesmaids, college friends, cousins, Marcus's sister Rachel, who'd never once looked me in the eye, starting their walk down the aisle. Through the window, I caught a glimpse of the guests outside on the cathedral steps, politicians, CEOs, society columnists documenting every detail for tomorrow's papers. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was a photo from someone at the wedding party. Marcus standing at the altar in his Tom Ford tuxedo, his best man Derek beside him. Derek, who'd introduced us at that gala. Derek, who I now knew was Marcus's cousin and partner in what the FBI was calling the largest pharmaceutical fraud case in a decade. I zoomed in on Marcus's face. He looked nervous, yes, but also triumphant. In his mind, he'd already won. In approximately 12 minutes, he'd be married to me. In 6 months, after a tragic accident arranged through his connections with certain Russian business associates, he'd be a widowed heir to a billion-dollar pharmaceutical empire. The FBI had played me the recordings, Marcus and Derek discussing timelines, methods. Pills slipped into my vitamins, a suspicious car accident. They debated which would look less suspicious, these two men I'd trusted, planning my murder with the same casual efficiency they probably used to order lunch. "How long after the wedding?" Derek's voice on the recording, distorted but clear enough. 6 months, maybe 8. We need to look devoted, grief-stricken. Marcus had laughed then, a sound I'd heard 1,000 times in moments I thought were intimate and real. "The prenup is ironclad, but if she dies, everything transfers to me as spouse. No waiting period, no trust fund complications. Then we liquidate what we can, move the rest offshore, and get out. And the senator? He'll be too broken to ask questions. I'll console him, help him through his grief. By the time he realizes anything's wrong, if he ever does, I'll be untouchable." I'd thrown up after that meeting with the FBI. Agent Morrison had been kind about it, patient as I wept and raged, and tried to process that the man I'd planned a future with had been planning my death. "Why wait?" I'd asked her through tears. "Why let this go on?" "Because Marcus isn't working alone," she'd explained. "The pharmaceutical theft, the offshore accounts, the planned murder, they're all connected to a larger network. We need the wedding to happen to catch everyone in the act. The money transfers are scheduled for the day after. Several key players will be here, at your wedding. If we move too soon, they scatter and we lose them. So I'm bait. You're a witness who happens to be in a unique position to help us take down a criminal enterprise that's been operating for years. But yes, I won't lie to you. There's risk. If Marcus suspects anything, if anyone in his network realizes you know..." She hadn't needed to finish that sentence. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, like this video, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The door opened. My father stood there in his morning suit, silver-haired and distinguished, every inch the powerful senator. He'd been so happy when I'd announced my engagement. Marcus was exactly the kind of son-in-law he'd always wanted. Educated, ambitious, well-spoken. Someone who could carry on the Ashford name, who understood politics and power. Dad had no idea his future son-in-law had targeted me specifically because of him. Because a senator's daughter, a pharmaceutical heiress whose family trusted her completely, was the perfect mark. "Ready, Princess?" Dad offered his arm, his eyes suspiciously bright. "You look just like your mother did on our wedding day." I took his arm, feeling the weight of my phone in the hidden pocket of my dress. The wire taped to my skin under the beaded bodice felt like it was burning. "Dad, I need to tell you something." "After?" he said gently. "Whatever it is, it can wait. Right now, let's focus on this moment. Your wedding day only happens once." If only he knew how carefully true that was going to be. We walked through the cathedral's back corridors, my train whispering against marble floors that had witnessed a century of weddings. Through the walls, I could hear the organist building to the bridal chorus. 300 guests rising to their feet. Marcus taking his position at the altar, his back straight, his smile practiced. Agent Morrison had walked me through what would happen. The ceremony would begin normally. I would walk down the aisle. We would reach the altar. Father Benedict would start the traditional Catholic ceremony, and then, at a specific moment, after the opening prayer but before the exchange of vows, I would give the signal. A simple gesture, touching my right earring. The doors at the end of the aisle stood before us, closed. On the other side, those 300 guests waited. Marcus waited. Derek waited. And scattered throughout the crowd, dressed in their finest attire with credentials identifying them as distant family friends, 14 federal agents waited too. "I love you, Dad," I said softly. He squeezed my hand. "I love you too, Princess. Always." The doors opened. The cathedral stretched before me like a tunnel, endless pews filled with faces turned toward me in anticipation. Candles flickered in wall sconces, flowers covered every surface, white roses, my favorites, ordered by Marcus with my money. The ceiling soared 60 feet above, painted with scenes of biblical weddings, saints blessing unions, promises being made before God. And at the end of that long white runner, Marcus stood waiting. His face when he saw me, if I hadn't known the truth, I would have believed that look of love, of wonder. He'd practiced it so well. I began walking, each step measured, the train of my dress heavy behind me. Dad's hand stayed steady on my arm. Around us, guests smiled and wept, their phones out to capture every moment despite the no photography rule. Social media would explode in minutes. Ashford wedding was already trending, I'd been told. Halfway down the aisle, I caught sight of faces I recognized from the FBI briefings. There, 3 rows back on the groom's side, Marcus's uncle from Ohio, who was actually his handler in the fraud operation. 2 rows from the front, the woman in the peacock blue dress was Elena Komarov, connected to the Russian contacts who would have provided the untraceable compounds for my eventual murder. Behind her, 3 men in matching gray suits who ran the shell companies used to launder the stolen pharmaceuticals. All here, all together, all about to be arrested at what was supposed to be the social event of the season. My heart pounded so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. The music swelled. Marcus's eyes stayed locked on mine, his smile never wavering. He'd probably been practicing that smile too, rehearsing for the cameras, for the image of the devoted groom. 10 feet from the altar, 5 feet. Dad stopped, turned to me. Who gives this woman to be married to this man? In the script, he was supposed to say, "Her mother and I do." Instead, he paused, really looking at my face for the first time since we'd started walking. Whatever he saw there made him hesitate. "Dad," I whispered, "trust me." He didn't understand, but he nodded slowly. "Her mother and I do." He placed my hand in Marcus's and stepped back. Marcus's palm was slightly damp. Nervous? Or excited about the money he thought he'd secured? His thumb stroked my hand, the gesture he knew I found comforting. Everything was a manipulation, every touch calculated. "You're beautiful," he murmured, just loud enough for the front rows to hear. "The perfect groom." "Thank you," I replied, my voice steady. Father Benedict smiled at us from behind his ornate lectern. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to join together this man and this woman in holy matrimony." The traditional words washed over me. Marcus squeezed my hand. In my peripheral vision, I could see Agent Morrison, positioned as a second cousin on the bride's side, her hand resting casually near her purse, near her weapon. Marriage is not to be entered into lightly, but reverently, deliberately, and in accordance with the purposes for which it was instituted by God. I thought about those recordings. Marcus laughing about my death. Derek asking about the timeline. The woman in peacock blue discussing which compounds would be least detectable in an autopsy. Into this holy union, Marcus Christopher Webb and Catherine Marie Ashford now come to be joined. My full name: Catherine Marie Ashford, only daughter of Senator Richard Ashford, heiress to a pharmaceutical fortune built over 3 generations. Not a person to Marcus, a transaction, a means to an end. Father Benedict continued, "If any person can show just cause why they may not be joined together, let them speak now or forever hold their peace." The traditional pause. No one ever actually spoke during this part. It was theater, a vestige of an older time. I reached up slowly, as if adjusting my veil, my fingers trembling only slightly, and touched my right earring. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. The cathedral was utterly silent, 300 people holding their breath. Then Agent Morrison stood up. "Federal Bureau of Investigation," her voice rang out clear and commanding. "Nobody move!" The cathedral erupted. Gasps, screams, the sound of 300 people trying to process what was happening. Marcus's hand clenched mine painfully tight, his face draining of color. "What the hell?" he started. More agents were standing now, badges visible, weapons drawn but pointed safely down. They moved with practiced efficiency through the pews, cutting off exits. Marcus Christopher Webb. Agent Morrison was walking toward us now, 2 agents flanking her. Derek Allen Webb, Elena Komarov, Michael Brennan, Stephen Yates. You are all under arrest for wire fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, pharmaceutical theft, and money laundering. The altar had become chaos. Derek tried to run, but 2 agents tackled him before he made it 5 feet. Elena sat frozen in her pew, her face calculating even in shock. The 3 men in gray suits were being handcuffed, one of them shouting about lawyers and wrongful arrest. Marcus turned to me, and for the first time since I'd known him, I saw his real face. Not the charming lawyer, not the devoted fiancé. Something cold and vicious that had always been lurking beneath. "You," he hissed. "You did this." "Yes," I said clearly. "I did." His hand moved, toward me or toward his pocket, I never found out, because Agent Morrison was there, pulling him away from me, spinning him around. "Marcus Webb, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." I stood at the altar in my wedding dress, bouquet still in hand, watching federal agents arrest my fiancé and his criminal network. The guests were shouting now, some trying to leave, others filming everything on their phones. My mother was sobbing somewhere in the front pews. My father stood perfectly still, his face unreadable. Father Benedict looked at me, utterly bewildered. "My child, what—" "I'm sorry, Father," I said, "but this wedding wasn't going to happen. It couldn't." Marcus was screaming now as they pulled his hands behind his back. "You think you're so smart. You think this is over. You have no idea what you've done, no idea who you're dealing with." "Actually," I said, loud enough for him to hear, loud enough for everyone to hear, "I know exactly who I'm dealing with. I've known for 6 months. Every dinner, every kiss, every time you told me you loved me, I knew you were planning to kill me for my money. I've been recording everything, every conversation, every transaction, every single piece of evidence the FBI needed to take down your entire operation." The look on his face was almost worth the 6 months of lying next to someone who wanted me dead. Almost worth the nightmares. Almost worth the fear. "And for the record," I added, my voice shaking now but strong, "I never loved you. Not really. Because the man I thought I loved never existed. You were always just a con artist who made the mistake of choosing the wrong mark." Agent Morrison was pulling him away now, other agents rounding up the network members scattered through the pews. The cathedral was a riot of noise and confusion, but I stood perfectly still, my Vera Wang dress spotless, my makeup intact, my wires still recording every second. My father reached me first. "Catherine, I'm sorry, I couldn't tell you," I said. "They said if anyone knew, if word got out—" "Shh!" He pulled me into his arms, and I finally let myself shake. "You're safe. That's all that matters. You're safe." But I wasn't. Not yet. Because as the agents led Marcus toward the cathedral doors, he looked back at me one last time, and even with his hands cuffed behind his back, even surrounded by federal agents, his smile was cold and confident. "This isn't over, Catherine," he called out. "Not even close." The doors closed behind him. The cathedral descended into chaos as agents began interviewing guests, securing evidence, documenting everything. Somewhere, sirens wailed. Tomorrow, every news outlet in the country would lead with this story. The senator's daughter, the wedding day arrests, the pharmaceutical fraud case of the decade. But all I could hear was Marcus's last words, echoing in that soaring space. "This isn't over." Agent Morrison appeared at my elbow, her expression grim. "We need to get you out of here. There are protocols." "What did he mean?" I interrupted. "When he said I didn't know who I was dealing with?" She exchanged a glance with her partner. "We'll discuss it in a secure location. Right now we need to move." "Agent Morrison." I gripped her arm. "What aren't you telling me?" The hesitation on her face sent ice through my veins. "We arrested 17 people today. Based on your recordings and our investigation, we can connect them to $40 million in stolen pharmaceuticals, 3 shell companies, and multiple counts of fraud." She paused. But Marcus was right about one thing. These 17 people? They're not the top of the organization. They're middle management. The cathedral spun around me. 6 months. 6 months of wearing a wire, gathering evidence, living with a man who planned my murder. And it wasn't even finished. "How high does this go?" My father's voice was dangerously quiet. Agent Morrison looked at him, then at me. "Senator, perhaps we should—" "How high?" He repeated. "We don't know yet. But based on the communications we've intercepted, there's a level above Marcus and his network. People he reported to. People who provided the initial capital, the connections, the entire framework for this operation." She turned back to me. "People who now know their operation has been compromised. By you." The flowers I'd been holding slipped from my hands, scattering white petals across the marble floor. "So I'm still in danger?" "You were always in danger," she said bluntly. "That's why we moved when we did. But yes, now it's different. Marcus and Derek can't hurt you from federal custody, but whoever they worked for. She didn't finish the sentence. My mother pushed through the chaos, her makeup ruined by tears, my bridesmaids trailing behind her looking shell-shocked. Catherine, oh my God, Catherine. I let her embrace me, let my family surround me, but my mind was racing. 6 months of pretending, of gathering evidence, of doing everything the FBI asked. I'd thought today would be the end of it. Justice served. Bad guys arrested. Happily never after for the girl who'd been too trusting, too naive, too desperate to be loved. Instead, it was just the beginning. We're taking her to a safe house, Agent Morrison was telling my father. Both of you actually, until we understand the full scope of the threat. Like witness protection? My mother's voice climbed an octave. Protective custody, temporary. We have a facility. Absolutely not. My father's senator voice, the one that had intimidated Supreme Court justices. My daughter is not going into hiding. We have our own security. With all respect, Senator, your private security didn't prevent your daughter from getting engaged to a man planning to murder her. The silence that followed was deafening. Dad, I said quietly, let them do their job. He looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw the moment he understood. His little girl, his princess, had spent 6 months living a nightmare, had been brave enough to become a federal witness, had stood at an altar in front of 300 people and given a signal that would end a criminal operation, and was still in danger. How long? He asked Agent Morrison. As long as it takes. I watched as more agents led suspects out of the cathedral, the woman in the peacock dress, the uncle from Ohio, Marcus's sister Rachel, who was crying and claiming she didn't know anything. Outside, I could hear more sirens, news helicopters circling, the whole world descending on what was supposed to be my fairy tale wedding. Vanessa appeared beside me, her face pale. Kath? Jesus Christ, Kath, what? I'll explain everything, I promised. But not here, not now. She nodded, squeezing my hand so tight it hurt. I knew something was wrong. I knew it. I should have pushed harder. You couldn't have known. Nobody could. Except me. I'd known for 6 months. Had let him kiss me, hold me, plan our future together, all while knowing exactly what he was. Agent Morrison was back, another agent with her. Ms. Ashford, we really need to move. There are vehicles waiting at the east entrance. Wait. I looked at the altar where I'd been standing moments ago, the flowers, the candles, the priest still looking bewildered. I need 1 more minute, please. She hesitated, then nodded. 1 minute. I walked back to the altar alone, my train trailing behind me, my heels clicking on marble. Father Benedict watched me approach, his weathered face kind despite his confusion. Father, I said softly, I'm sorry for the disruption, for turning your cathedral into a crime scene. Child, he said gently, I've been performing weddings for 40 years. This is certainly the first one that's ended with federal arrests, but... He smiled slightly. God works in mysterious ways. You did what you had to do to stay safe. No apology needed. Would you... I hesitated. Would you say a prayer? Not for the wedding that didn't happen, for whatever comes next. He placed his weathered hand on my head, his voice resonating through the now quiet cathedral. Heavenly Father, we ask your protection over this child. She has walked through darkness and shown tremendous courage. Grant her strength for the trials ahead, wisdom to navigate uncertain paths, and peace in the knowledge that she stands in your light. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen, I whispered. When I opened my eyes, I was crying. Not for Marcus, not for the wedding that would never be, but for everything I'd lost without even realizing it. My naivety, my trust, my belief that love was something pure and uncomplicated. Agent Morrison was waiting at the end of the aisle. The cathedral had emptied now except for agents securing evidence and a few remaining guests being interviewed. My family stood in a cluster near the doors, surrounded by more agents. I took one last look at the altar, at the flowers and candles and all the trappings of a ceremony meant to celebrate love. Then I walked away from it, my wedding dress whispering against the marble floor toward whatever came next. My phone buzzed as we reached the doors. A text from an unknown number. "You made a mistake today, Catherine, and mistakes have consequences." I showed it to Agent Morrison. Her jaw tightened. "We need to trace this." "They found me already," I said, surprised by how calm I sounded. "They found me at my own wedding." "We'll keep you safe." "You can't promise that." I looked at the phone, at the threatening message, at the proof that Marcus had been right. This wasn't over. "Can you?" Her silence was answer enough. As we left the cathedral through a side entrance, SUVs with tinted windows waiting, agents forming a protective barrier around us, I caught sight of myself in one of the ancient mirrors lining the hallway. A woman in an ivory Vera Wang dress, hair perfectly styled, makeup immaculate. A bride who'd walked down the aisle but never said, "I do." A target. The SUV door closed behind me, sealing me in cool, bulletproof silence. Through the tinted windows, I could see crowds gathering. Reporters, photographers, curious onlookers drawn by the spectacle. Somewhere in that crowd, I knew, could be the people Marcus worked for. Watching, waiting, planning their next move. My mother climbed in beside me, still crying. My father took the seat across, his phone already out, probably calling lawyers. Agent Morrison sat up front, speaking quietly into a radio. The SUV pulled away from St. Catherine's Cathedral, leaving behind the flowers and the guests and the wedding that would go down in history, just not for the reasons anyone expected. I looked down at my left hand, at the empty finger where Marcus's engagement ring had been until last night, when I'd quietly returned it to the FBI as evidence. 3 carats, platinum setting, purchased with money he'd already stolen from companies he'd infiltrated before finding me. Everything had been a lie. Every kiss, every promise, every moment I'd thought was real. And now the people who'd orchestrated that lie knew I'd exposed them. My phone buzzed again. Another text from the unknown number. "See you soon, Catherine. We're looking forward to continuing our conversation." The city slid past outside, familiar streets looking suddenly foreign, threatening. Somewhere out there, Marcus sat in federal custody, probably already calling lawyers, already planning his defense. And somewhere else, his bosses, people I'd never seen, never known about, were planning something too. Agent Morrison turned in her seat. "Ms. Ashford, I need you to listen carefully. What happened today, what you did, it was incredibly brave. You've helped us take down a significant operation, but you need to understand that you're now a high-value target for some very dangerous people." "I understand," I said. "I'm not sure you do." Her expression was grim. "The man you knew as Marcus Webb. He's small-time compared to the organization behind him. These people have resources, connections, and a very long reach. They've killed before to protect their operations. Are you trying to scare me?" "I'm trying to prepare you." She paused. "The safe house we're taking you to, it's not permanent. It's just until we can assess the threat level and put proper protections in place. But I need you to be aware that your life, as you knew it, has changed, potentially forever." My mother made a sound between a sob and a gasp. My father's face had gone completely still, his political mask firmly in place. "How long?" I asked. "How long before I know if I'm safe? There's no timeline. These investigations can take months, even years. We'll do everything we can, but you can't guarantee anything." "No," she said quietly. "I can't." The SUV turned onto a highway, heading away from the city, away from my apartment and my life and everything I'd known. Behind us, 2 more SUVs followed, filled with more agents. Protection or prison, I wasn't sure there was much difference at this point. I thought about the wedding that hadn't happened, the life I'd thought I was stepping into. Mrs. Marcus Webb, society wife, probably pregnant within a year if his timeline held, dead within 8 months, an unfortunate accident, a tragedy that would make the news for a cycle before fading into history. Instead, I was Catherine Ashford, federal witness, target of an unknown criminal organization, heading toward a safe house in a wedding dress that cost more than most people made in a year. My phone buzzed a 3rd time. I almost didn't look, but Agent Morrison was watching me in the rearview mirror. This message was different. Not a text, but a photo. It was me, walking out of the cathedral, taken from somewhere in the crowd. The angle was perfect, professional almost, and in the corner, barely visible, was a red laser dot. Right over my heart. The message attached was simple. "We had you. We let you go. Next time, we won't be so generous." I showed Agent Morrison without a word. I watched her face change, watched her grab the radio, heard her sharp commands to the agents in the other vehicles. The SUV accelerated, taking an exit I didn't recognize. "They were there," my father said, his voice hollow. "At the wedding. They were there. With a rifle." Agent Morrison confirmed grimly. "Probably on a rooftop. They're sending a message." "What message?" My mother's voice was small, broken. I looked at the photo again, at that red dot perfectly positioned. That they could have killed me. That they chose not to. That whether I live or die is entirely up to them. The SUV raced through unfamiliar streets, the city giving way to suburbs, then open highway. My wedding dress felt suffocating now, the beading digging into my ribs, the wire still taped to my skin, a reminder of the 6 months I'd spent gathering evidence. 6 months that had ended with federal arrests and a sniper's red dot over my heart. "We're changing locations," Agent Morrison was saying into the radio. "Primary safe house may be compromised. Switching to Facility 7. Authorization Morrison Delta 4. Yes, I understand. Do it anyway." More codes, more protocols. The machinery of federal protection closing around me like a cage, or a coffin. I looked at my parents, both of them aging before my eyes, my father's political confidence cracking, my mother's society polish dissolving into raw fear. I'd done this to them, by trusting Marcus, by falling for his lies, by being naive enough to believe someone could love me for who I was, not what I was worth. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "Don't." My father's voice was fierce. "Don't apologize for being the target of criminals. Don't apologize for being brave enough to expose them. Don't you dare apologize, Catherine." But I was apologizing. For all of it. For the wedding that wasn't. For the danger I'd brought to our family. For the fact that somewhere out there, people were planning their next move, and I had no idea when or how they'd make it. The SUV turned onto a smaller road, trees closing in on either side. No more city lights, No more familiar landmarks. Just darkness and the headlights cutting through it and the knowledge that everything had changed. My phone stayed silent now. No more texts, no more photos. Somehow that was worse than the threats. The silence felt like waiting, like predators watching their prey, patient and confident in the eventual outcome. I looked at the wedding dress in the dim light of the SUV. This morning, I'd put it on thinking it would be the costume for my greatest performance. Walking down that aisle, giving the signal, watching justice be served. Now it felt like a shroud. "How much farther?" my mother asked, her voice small. 20 minutes, Agent Morrison replied. "Maybe less." 20 minutes until we reached safety. Or what passed for safety when you just exposed a criminal network and their reach extended to placing snipers at your wedding. 20 minutes until my new life began, if I survived long enough to have one. The safe house wasn't what I expected. No remote cabin in the woods, no anonymous apartment building. Instead, Agent Morrison drove us to what looked like a corporate retreat center. Modern glass and steel, surrounded by manicured lawns, completely unremarkable except for the armed guards at the gate who checked 3 forms of ID before letting us through. "Welcome to Facility 7, Morrison said as we pulled up to the main entrance. "Officially, this is a government training center. Unofficially, it's where we house high-value witnesses when standard protocols aren't secure enough." High value. Like I was an asset, not a person. Maybe that's all I'd ever been to anyone, an asset. To Marcus, I'd been worth $40 million in stolen pharmaceuticals and a pharmaceutical empire. To the FBI, I was worth whatever information I could provide. To myself, I wasn't sure what I was worth anymore. Inside, the facility was sterile and professional. Conference rooms, offices, what looked like dormitories down long hallways. Agent Morrison led us to a suite on the 3rd floor. 3 bedrooms, a common area, reinforced windows that probably cost more than my wedding dress. "You'll stay here while we assess the situation," she said. "There's a full security team, 24-hour surveillance, and—" "How long?" I interrupted, still wearing my wedding dress because I had nothing else. Everything I owned was back at my apartment, which Morrison said was now a potential security risk. 48 hours minimum. After that, we'll know more about the threat level. And if the threat level remains high, she met my eyes, then we discuss other options. After she left, my mother immediately collapsed onto one of the sofas, still in her St. John suit, her makeup destroyed by tears. My father stood at the window, staring out at the grounds, his phone clutched in his hand like a lifeline. "I need to change," I said to no one in particular. An agent appeared with bags, clothes from my apartment gathered by a security team. The idea of strangers going through my things should have bothered me, but I was too numb to care. I grabbed the bag and locked myself in one of the bathrooms. The Vera Wang dress came off in pieces. Buttons I couldn't manage alone, zippers that stuck, layers of lace and silk that had been meant to make me beautiful for a man who wanted me dead. I left it on the bathroom floor in a heap and stood under the shower until the water ran cold, scrubbing off makeup and the last traces of the wire adhesive, washing away the pretense that today had been anything but a complete disaster. When I emerged in jeans and a sweater, my father was on his 3rd phone call and my mother had opened a bottle of wine that someone had thoughtfully stocked in the suite. She poured me a glass without asking. "To the worst wedding day in history," she said, her voice brittle. We drank in silence. My phone sat on the coffee table where I'd left it, dark and quiet. No more threatening messages, no more photos with laser dots. But I couldn't stop staring at it, waiting for the next threat. The next reminder that I'd made powerful enemies. "We need to talk about what happens next," my father said, finally putting down his phone. His senator voice was back, controlled and authoritative. "I've been in contact with our attorneys. They're working with the FBI, but we need our own security, our own—" "Dad." I set down the wine glass. "They had a sniper at my wedding. A sniper. Your security didn't even know. Which is why we're hiring. It won't matter." I was surprised by how calm I sounded. "Don't you understand? These people, whoever they are, they have resources we can't match. Money, connections, reach. They let me walk out of that cathedral. They chose to let me live. And they can choose differently whenever they want." The silence that followed was suffocating. "So what do you suggest?" my mother asked quietly. "That you just give up? Let them win?" "I don't know what I suggest." I stood up, restless energy coursing through me. "I don't know anything anymore. I thought I knew Marcus. I thought I was doing the right thing by working with the FBI. I thought today would end it. But it's not ended. It's barely even started." My phone buzzed. We all froze. It was Agent Morrison, Conference Room B, 5 minutes, new developments. The conference room was dominated by a large screen showing what looked like surveillance footage. Agent Morrison stood at the head of the table with 2 other agents I didn't recognize. Their expressions told me everything I needed to know before anyone spoke. "What happened?" my father demanded. 17 arrests this afternoon," Morrison began. "All processed, all in federal custody. We've begun preliminary interrogations." She paused. "Marcus Webb is asking to speak with you." "Absolutely not," my father said immediately. "With all respect, Senator, it's not your decision." Morrison looked at me. "He claims he has information about the organization above him, about the people who put the hit order on you." "And you believe him?" I asked. "We don't know yet, but he's insisting he'll only talk to you, face to face." The room spun slightly. "You want me to go into federal custody and sit across from a man who planned my murder? We want to know what he knows. And right now, you're the leverage we have to find out." Morrison's expression softened slightly. "I know what I'm asking. But Catherine, these people, the ones above Marcus, they're ghosts. We have evidence of the pharmaceutical theft, the fraud, the money laundering, but we can't connect it to anyone above the network we arrested today. If Marcus has information, real information, it could be the break we need. Or it could be a trap," my father said. "It would be in a federal facility, completely controlled environment, full security." "He sent her a photo with a sniper's crosshairs over her heart," my mother's voice cracked. "You think a controlled environment means anything to these people?" Morrison didn't answer, which was answer enough. I looked at the surveillance footage frozen on the screen. Marcus in an orange jumpsuit, hands cuffed, sitting in an interrogation room looking nothing like the charming lawyer I'd thought I loved. This was who he'd always been underneath. A criminal. A con artist. A man who'd been willing to kill me for money. "When?" I asked. "Catherine, no—" my father started. "When?" I repeated, looking at Morrison. "Tomorrow morning. We can have you there and back in 4 hours. Then set it up." The argument that followed was loud and long. My father threatening to call everyone from the Attorney General to the President, my mother crying and demanding I reconsider, Agent Morrison calmly reiterating security protocols until I finally shouted loud enough to make everyone stop. "He doesn't get to win," my voice echoed in the conference room. "He doesn't get to manipulate me one more time, to hide behind lawyers and silence and make me feel helpless. If he has information, I'll get it. And then I'll watch him go to prison for the rest of his life. That's what happens tomorrow." In the silence that followed, Morrison nodded slowly. Okay, but we do this my way. Every protocol, every security measure. Agreed? Agreed. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in the unfamiliar bed in the safe house, staring at the ceiling, replaying every conversation I'd ever had with Marcus, looking for the truth underneath the lies, trying to understand how I'd missed it, how I'd been so completely fooled. The truth was, I'd wanted to believe him, wanted to believe someone could love me for who I was, not what I represented. My grandmother had warned me before she died. Trust no one completely, especially those who seem too good to be true. I'd thought she was just cynical from a lifetime in business and politics. She'd been trying to protect me. At 3 a.m, I gave up on sleep and went to the common area. My father was there, still in his clothes from the wedding, nursing a glass of whiskey. Couldn't sleep either? I asked. He shook his head. I keep thinking about all the times I met with him, planning the wedding, discussing your future, welcoming him into our family. He sat in my office, drank my whiskey, and plotted to murder my daughter. And I never saw it. None of us did. That was his talent. I'm supposed to read people, Catherine. It's literally my job. I've negotiated with foreign dignitaries, stared down corporate lobbyists, built a career on understanding what people really want. He took a long drink. And I welcomed your killer into my home with open arms. Dad, no, let me finish. He turned to face me, and I saw tears in his eyes for the first time since I was a child. When your mother and I had you, I made a promise. To protect you, to give you everything, to make sure you never faced the kind of hardships we did growing up. And I failed. I failed completely. You didn't fail. Marcus did. The people who sent him did. But not you. Tomorrow, when you go to that facility, when you sit across from him. He paused, struggling for words. Remember that you're not the naive girl he thought he was manipulating. You're the woman who exposed his entire operation. You're stronger than he ever realized. Don't let him take that from you. I hugged him then, this man who'd always been larger than life, reduced to tears by the thought of losing me. I won't. I promise. The next morning came too quickly. Agent Morrison and 3 other agents arrived at 6 a.m. The drive to the federal facility took 90 minutes through routes that kept changing, standard counter-surveillance protocols, Morrison explained. The facility itself was exactly what I'd imagined. Concrete and razor wire, guards and checkpoints, the kind of place where hope went to die. They processed me through 3 separate security screenings before finally leading me to a small room with a metal table, 2 chairs, and a 2-way mirror. He'll be brought in shortly, Morrison said. You'll be completely safe. We'll be right on the other side of that glass, and if at any point you want to stop, I won't want to stop. She studied my face for a long moment. He's going to try to get under your skin. That's what people like Marcus do. They find your weaknesses and exploit them. Don't let him. I know exactly what he is now. He can't hurt me anymore. The door opened. 2 guards brought Marcus in, his hands and feet shackled, the orange jumpsuit hanging loose on his frame. He'd lost weight in just 24 hours, or maybe he'd always been this thin and I'd never noticed through the expensive suits and practiced charm. They chained him to the table and left. And then it was just us, separated by 3 feet of metal and 6 months of lies. "Hello, Catherine," he said. His voice was the same, smooth, educated, pleasant, like we were meeting for coffee instead of in a federal prison after he'd tried to murder me. "Marcus, you look well, considering." He smiled, and it was almost genuine. "Did you enjoy your wedding? I thought the flowers were particularly nice. Your choice, I assume. I'm not here for small talk. No, you're here because the FBI thinks I have information about my superiors. And you're right, I do. He leaned back as much as the chains allowed. But first, I want you to understand something. I need you to know that this, he gestured around the room, wasn't personal. I laughed. It came out harsh and bitter. You plan to murder me. How much more personal does it get? It was business. You were an asset, a means to an end. Nothing about you personally made you a target except your last name and your bank account. He said it like he was explaining something reasonable, rational. If it helps, I actually did enjoy our time together. You're intelligent, cultured, far less tedious than most heiresses I've encountered. Most heiresses you've... I stopped, understanding flooding through me. I wasn't your first. Third, actually. The first two weren't as successful. One figured it out too early, had to cut losses and move on. The other married me, but her family was smarter than yours about prenups and access to funds. His smile widened. You were supposed to be the perfect mark. Trusting, romantic, desperate for connection. And you were right, up until you weren't. When did you know I'd figured it out? I didn't. Not until the FBI showed up at the Cathedral. That's what impressed me most, Catherine. 6 months you lived with me, slept beside me, acted the devoted fiancé while wearing a wire and building a case. That takes extraordinary discipline. I underestimated you. Clearly. He leaned forward, chains rattling. The organization I work for, they didn't underestimate you. They knew exactly what you were capable of the moment you became engaged to me. Every asset we target gets a full background check, psychological profile, vulnerability assessment. They knew you were intelligent, knew you had your grandmother's instincts for business. They just bet that your desire for love would override your common sense. And when I proved them wrong, they adapted. That's what makes them dangerous, Catherine. They always have contingencies. The sniper at your wedding, that was a message. They could have ended it there, eliminated the witness before the trial. But that would have brought down too much heat, too much scrutiny. Better to let you live, let you testify, and deal with you after the public attention fades. My blood ran cold. You're saying they're waiting. I'm saying you have a death sentence hanging over you. The question is whether it executes in 6 months or 6 years. They're patient. They can afford to be. He paused. Unless you disappear. Witness protection. Real disappearance. New identity, new life, no contact with anyone from your past. Give up being Catherine Ashford forever. It's the only way you survive. His eyes held mine. Or you could let me help you. Help me? I almost laughed. You just told me you planned to kill me. I said it wasn't personal. And it's not personal now when I say I can give you what you need to destroy the people above me. Names, account numbers, locations of evidence they think is hidden. Everything the FBI needs to dismantle the entire organization. In exchange for what? Reduced sentence. 20 years instead of life. Possibility of parole, and... He hesitated. Protection for my mother. She's in a nursing home in Ohio, early onset Alzheimer's. She doesn't know what I've done, never benefited from any of it. If I testify, if I give you everything, they'll go after her to punish me. The mention of his mother surprised me. In 2 years together, he'd barely spoken about her. Just another lie, I'd assumed. But the fear in his eyes now seemed genuine. You're asking me to protect your family while yours tried to destroy mine? I'm asking you to be better than the organization that sent me after you, to understand that my mother is an innocent in this, just like you were. His voice dropped. Catherine, I did terrible things. I planned worse, but my mother raised me alone, worked 3 jobs to put me through school, sacrificed everything for a son who repaid her by becoming exactly what she never wanted. She deserves better than to die afraid and confused because of my choices. I looked at this man I'd almost married, trying to find the lie, the manipulation, but all I saw was exhaustion and something that might have been genuine regret. "Tell me their names," I said quietly. "Promise me about my mother first." "I can't promise anything, but I'll ask the FBI to consider it." I leaned forward. "Now, tell me who they are." Marcus took a breath, then began talking, and for the next 3 hours, I sat in that cold federal room and listened as he laid out the entire organization. Names of people I'd never heard of, CEOs, politicians, lawyers, people who looked legitimate on the surface while running criminal enterprises underneath. He gave account numbers, shell company structures, locations of physical evidence. He described how they recruited people like him, how they identified targets like me, how they'd been operating for over a decade across 6 states. Agent Morrison and her team recorded every word. "The head of everything," Marcus finally said, his voice hoarse from talking, "is a woman named Victoria Chen. She owns Chen Investment Group, completely legitimate on paper. Venture capital, pharmaceutical investments, real estate. Worth about $3 billion on the books, probably twice that offshore. She started recruiting me 5 years ago, after I did some legal work for one of her subsidiary companies. Offered me a chance to make real money, not just lawyer fees. All I had to do was be willing to play a long game. And you said yes. I was drowning in student debt, watching my mother deteriorate in a state facility I could barely afford. Victoria offered me a way out, a purpose. She made it seem almost noble, redistributing wealth from people who'd never earned it to people who had the intelligence and drive to use it properly." He laughed bitterly. "I believed her, or I convinced myself I did. Either way, I became what she needed, a hunter." "Why are you telling me this now? What changed?" "You changed it. When you exposed the operation, when you stood up at that altar and destroyed everything we'd built, Victoria sent a message through our network channels. She said you were a problem that needed to be eliminated, but carefully, publicly, to send a message to anyone else who might consider crossing her." He met my eyes. "She wanted it to look like suicide. Depression after discovering your fiancé's betrayal, couldn't handle the public humiliation. She had it all planned out." "But you're in federal custody. You can't—" "There are 4 other assets in play right now. Other Marcus Webbs, targeting other wealthy targets. One of them is supposed to pivot, to befriend you after an appropriate grieving period, to help you heal, to gain your trust. And then, when everyone's moved on from the wedding scandal, to help you die quietly." The room tilted. "Who?" "I don't know specifically. That's how Victoria works, compartmentalized information. But I know the profile. Probably someone connected to your social circle, someone who seems safe and supportive. A friend of a friend, a colleague of your father's, someone perfectly positioned to get close." I thought about everyone who'd reached out since yesterday. The flood of messages, offers of support, friends I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly wanting to help. Any one of them could be the next trap. How do I stop this? You don't. You can't identify them before they make their move. But the FBI can break down Victoria's network if they move fast enough. She's careful, but she's not invincible. The evidence I can provide, if corroborated with what they've already gathered from the arrests yesterday, should be enough for warrants. Maybe even RICO charges. He paused. But you need to move fast. Once she knows I'm talking, she'll start destroying evidence and disappearing assets. You have maybe 48 hours. Agent Morrison's voice came through a speaker in the ceiling. We need to verify everything you've just told us. Then verify it, Marcus said, but do it quickly. They took him away after that. I sat alone in the interrogation room, processing everything I'd just heard. A $3 billion criminal enterprise, multiple victims like me, a woman named Victoria Chen who treated people's lives like investment portfolios to be liquidated. Morrison came in looking grim. We're running everything he said, but Catherine, even if it all checks out, even if we can build a case against Victoria Chen, it's going to take time, months, maybe years, and in that time, I'm a target. Yes. So what are my options? Really? She sat down across from me. Witness protection is the safest. New identity, new location, no contact with your family except through secure channels. You'd have to give up everything, your name, your inheritance, your life as Catherine Ashford. And if I don't, then we provide security as best we can. But Catherine, Marcus was right about one thing. These people are patient. They can wait you out, wait for you to relax, wait for the perfect moment. And eventually, that moment will come. I thought about my father's words from last night, about being stronger than Marcus realized, about not letting him take that from me. There's a third option, I said slowly. What's that? I don't run. I don't hide. I become the problem they can't solve. I looked at Morrison. You need evidence against Victoria Chen, testimony from her other victims, proof of the network Marcus described. You need someone to help you build that case, someone who understands how these people think, how they operate. You want to work with us? Catherine, that's incredibly dangerous. Being Catherine Ashford is already incredibly dangerous. At least this way, I'm fighting back. An idea was forming, reckless and probably stupid, but feeling more right with every second. Marcus said there are 4 other assets in play. Other targets being set up the same way I was. What if we warn them? What if we expose the whole operation before Victoria can shut it down? That would require identifying the targets, which we can't do without someone who understands the pattern, someone who lived through it. I stood up, energy coursing through me. Marcus told you how they select targets. Wealthy, isolated, psychologically vulnerable. There can't be that many people who fit the profile and are currently engaged to someone new in their life. Cross-reference social media, engagement announcements, public records, find the patterns. Morrison was already pulling out her phone. This is crazy. This is the only way to stop them. To really stop them. I thought about the woman I'd been 24 hours ago, walking down that aisle in a dress that cost a fortune. Naive, trusting, believing in love. I can't be that person anymore. I won't be. So let me be someone else. Someone useful. I need to run this up the chain. Then run it. But do it fast, because Marcus was right about the timeline. Once Victoria knows he's talking, this window closes. The next 48 hours were a blur. Morrison's team worked around the clock to verify Marcus's information, while I sat in conference rooms outlining everything I remembered about how he'd approached me, courted me, built the trap I'd almost died in. They brought in behavioral psychologists, financial experts, database analysts, cross-referencing engagement announcements with financial profiles, looking for the pattern. And they found them. 4 women across 3 states. All wealthy, all recently engaged to men who'd entered their lives within the past 2 years. All fitting the exact profile Marcus had described. We tried to contact them through official channels, but Victoria's network was faster. 2 of the women refused to believe us. Their fiancés were too perfect, too loving. The FBI couldn't force them to accept protection. But 2 listened. Sarah Brennan in Boston, engaged to a corporate lawyer who'd swept her off her feet after her parents' death, left her with a $50 million inheritance. And Jennifer Yao in Seattle, whose tech company exit had made her a billionaire at 31, now engaged to a former Olympic athlete turned motivational speaker. Both of their fiancés had been recruited by Victoria Chen. Both had been planning to kill their targets within a year of marriage. With Marcus's testimony, the women's cooperation, and the evidence gathered from the original 17 arrests, the FBI finally had enough for warrants. They moved on Victoria Chen's operations simultaneously across 6 states, arresting 43 people in a single morning, seizing assets worth over $1 billion, dismantling what turned out to be one of the largest organized fraud and murder conspiracies in federal history. Victoria Chen herself was arrested at her Manhattan penthouse, trying to delete files from an encrypted server. She'd been planning to flee to a country without extradition treaties. She never got the chance. I watched it all unfold from the safe house, CNN playing on loop, my phone exploding with messages as the story broke. The senator's daughter who'd exposed a criminal empire, the wedding that became a federal operation, the 4 women who'd nearly been murdered for their money. 3 weeks after my wedding that wasn't, I stood in another federal building, not for an interrogation this time, but for a press conference. My father on one side, Agent Morrison on the other, Sarah and Jennifer flanking us in solidarity. "We're here today," my father said into a bank of microphones, his senator voice steady and strong, "to announce the formation of the Ashford Foundation for Financial Fraud Prevention. My daughter and the other survivors of this operation have agreed to help educate the public about sophisticated fraud schemes targeting wealthy individuals." I stepped forward. The cameras clicked and flashed, recording every moment for the evening news. What happened to me, to Sarah, to Jennifer? It can happen to anyone. These criminals are intelligent, patient, and convincing. They study their targets, exploit vulnerabilities, and build elaborate deceptions that can last years. But they can be stopped with awareness, vigilance, and the courage to come forward when something feels wrong. After the press conference, after the interviews and the questions and the endless documentation of my new role as a public figure fighting fraud, I finally had a moment alone. I sat in my father's office at the Capitol building, looking out at the Washington Monument in the distance. My phone rang. "Unknown number." I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Ms. Ashford." A woman's voice, cultured and cold. "This is Victoria Chen." My blood froze. "You're in federal custody." I'm allowed phone calls, even to the people who destroyed my life's work. She laughed softly. "I wanted to tell you something before the trial begins. Something Marcus probably didn't mention." "What's that?" "You were always going to survive. From the moment you got engaged, I knew you were too smart, too cautious. That's why I chose you." Her voice was almost warm now, conversational. I needed someone who would eventually figure it out. Someone who would expose Marcus and Derek and all the others. Someone who would lead the FBI to what they thought was the top of my organization. "You wanted to be caught?" I wanted the FBI to think they'd won, to think they'd dismantled everything while I moved my real operations offshore, beyond their reach. You were supposed to be my exit strategy, Catherine. A spectacular public victory for law enforcement while I quietly retired with $3 billion in untraceable assets. She paused. You ruined that by being too thorough. By convincing Marcus to talk about the real network, not just the front I'd prepared for sacrifice. So you're saying I won. You're saying I lost. But neither is quite true. Her voice hardened. I'll go to prison, yes. But my organization exists beyond me. The people who matter are already gone, already safe. And they remember what you did. They remember very clearly. Is that a threat? It's a promise. Not for today, not for tomorrow. But eventually, when everyone's forgotten about the wedding that wasn't, when you've built your foundation and your new life and you feel safe again, that's when they'll come. Because that's what we do, Catherine. We play the long game. The line went dead. I sat there for a long time, holding my phone, staring out at the monument, thinking about Victoria's words, about the threat that might come in a year, 5 years, 10 years. Then I opened my contacts and called Agent Morrison. I need to testify at Victoria's trial, I said. And then I need you to teach me everything you know about how to spot these people, how to stop them. Because if there's a network beyond Victoria, if there are more operations like this, I want to help take them down. Catherine, I'm not running. I'm not hiding. And I'm not waiting for them to come for me. I looked at my reflection in the window, seeing someone stronger than the woman who'd walked down that aisle 3 weeks ago. I'm going to hunt them instead. 6 months later, I stood in a different kind of venue. Not a cathedral, not a federal building, but a university auditorium filled with students studying criminal justice, finance, law enforcement. The Ashford Foundation had funded a new curriculum on financial fraud prevention, and I was giving the inaugural lecture. Most people think they could never be fooled, I told the audience. They think they're too smart, too careful, too aware. I thought that too. And then I fell in love with a man who was planning to murder me, and I didn't see it until almost too late. I clicked to the next slide, showing photos of Marcus, Victoria, the entire network we'd dismantled. But here's what I learned. Being fooled doesn't make you stupid. It makes you human. These criminals are professionals at manipulation. They study psychology, practice their techniques, refine their approaches over years. The only defense is knowledge, awareness, and the courage to trust your instincts when something feels wrong. After the lecture, students lined up to ask questions. Most wanted to know about that day at the cathedral, about facing Marcus in interrogation, about the moment I'd decided to fight back instead of disappear. One young woman waited until everyone else had left. She looked nervous, her hands twisting together, her eyes refusing to meet mine. Miss Ashford, I think my fiancé might be... She couldn't finish the sentence. I took her hand gently. Tell me everything. Because that's what I did now. That's who I'd become. Not the naive heiress, not the target, not the victim, but someone who'd survived and learned to recognize the patterns, who worked with the FBI on open cases, who'd made it her mission to protect others from the same trap I'd barely escaped. Marcus was serving 30 years in federal prison with possibility of parole. His testimony had been instrumental in the prosecutions. His mother was in a better facility now, paid for by witness protection funds. He'd asked to see me once, to apologize properly. I'd declined. Victoria Chen was serving life without parole. 43 members of her network were either convicted or awaiting trial. But she'd been right about one thing. We knew there were more out there. Other networks, other Victoria Chens, other sophisticated operations targeting vulnerable people. And I was going to help find them. That night, I sat in my new apartment, smaller than before, carefully secured in a building with excellent security. My parents had wanted me to move back home, but I needed my independence. Needed to prove I could stand alone. My phone buzzed. Agent Morrison. Another possible case in Miami. Woman engaged 6 months ago. Fiancé pushing for financial integration. Pattern matches. You available to consult? I smiled and typed back. When do we leave? The woman I'd been would have walked down that aisle, said, I do, and probably died within a year. The woman I'd become stood up at that altar, exposed a criminal empire, and turned her nightmare into a mission. Marcus had been right about one thing. I'd always been stronger than he realized. I just hadn't known it yet. Now I did, and I was never going to forget it again. The end. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.